Hi everyone, it's Laura Volpes for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to share with you how to create an easy to mail slimline shaker card using the Aloha stamp set. The products that I used are the Slimline Dotted Set 1 dies by Studio Katia, the Aloha stamp set and die set, the simple Trimmings dies, and the Trimmings Saying Swan stamp set for my sentiment. I started by doing some die cutting off camera, and I die cut some watercolor cardstock using the dies in the Dotted Slimline Set 1. I have my background there at the side of the screen, and here is the shaker window out of which I die cut this oval shape, which is also part of the Dotted Slimline Set 1 dies by Studio Katia. You can see how it looks once you lay them on top of each other. And then the next thing was to ink blend my background to add a little bit of color, and I wanted to create a soft sunset type of background, and I also wanted to test more color combinations with my new Distress Oxide in the color Speckled Dag. The colors that I'm using today are Speckled Dag. The second one that I'm using right now is Mute Lavender, which is absolutely beautiful and I think is kind of underrated in a way. I really want to use it a little bit more in my cards because I think the shade is really gorgeous. The third shade is an orange, and for that I used Dried Marigold, which is another color that I really love. And as you can see, I'm blending my inks with some ink foams, and I'm going back and forth with two colors wherever there is a transition area to make sure that the gradient there is nice and smooth. The cardstock that I'm using is Watercolour cardstock by Spectrum Noir, and then once I was done ink blending, I decided to add some shimmer to my background using this Dilutions shimmer spray. This was a new to me product, and I first shook the bottle really well, and then I spritzed my background very generously with this gorgeous shimmery solution. I set the background aside to dry, and then I started working on my images. I set the background aside to dry, and then I started working on my images. I stamped all the images in the Aloha stamp set using Spectrum Noir alcohol-proof black ink on some Neenah Solar White 110 pounds cardstock. I have the images mounted here on my Misty, and this way I can go ahead and stamp the images multiple times, and I'm not going to get any double stamping or any ghosting at all. The Misty has become such a staple in my card making, whether it's this big size one or the mini one. For the coloring today, I decided to use my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers. These are alcohol markers, so you can blend them with each other, and I decided to use some oranges to color the flowers and obviously some greens for the leaves. I'm not going to show you the entire coloring process because all the flowers were colored with the same color combinations and the same technique, and also for the leaves I'm only going to show you each color scheme once so that you can see how I colored each of them, and you can apply the same technique and color palette to the rest of the leaves, which were colored in a similar color, if that makes sense. Anyway, coming back to the flowers, what I did was I added the lightest color in my color scheme here using some brush strokes, and I used that to kind of map out the shadows, and then I'm going to go in with progressively darker markers, focusing them more and more towards the center of the flower, so at the base of the petals, to create some dimension and some shading. In the same way, I'm going to add shading to these leaves, always using these brush strokes because they create a lot of beautiful texture, and always starting with the lightest marker so that I can see where the shadows would fall and if what I have in mind makes sense and makes the result look appealing. I have the marker numbers listed here on screen as well as on the blog post that you will find linked in the description box down below. And for the leaves, I decided to use 3 different color combinations for my greens to color the 3 different kind of leaves. This is going to bring some variation in my coloring and is going to create more interest in the final image. And by the way, these flowers are really gorgeous and are just perfect for some fresh, colorful and summery cards, which is something I wanted to create today. Here is the result once the coloring is done, and I also went ahead of camera and die cut all the images with the coordinating dies. In the meantime, my background was also dry, and you can see here all the shimmer that was created by the shimmer spray. And at this point, I also took my shaker window and I started playing with my images a little bit to see if the arrangement that I had in mind worked, as well as the color combinations. Obviously, I had planned the card a little bit, but I always like to keep checking as I go ahead in the card making process that everything is working, because sometimes what we have in our head does not correspond to what we actually have in real life, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I wanted to create a shaker, but I didn't want it to be too thick because I wanted something that would be easier to mail. So what I did is I die cut 3 more sheets of heavyweight white cardstock using that rectangle die from the dotted SLIMLINE set 1 dies by Studio Katia. And then I'm going to basically line that up with the window of my shaker. I'm going to secure the two together with some purple tape that I stuck to the back of my hand just in case. And then I'm going to basically take the oval die, nest it in the opening that I have on the top panel here, and secure that too, so that I can run everything through my die cutting machine. And this way the bottom panel has the window in exactly the same position as my front one. I can peel off the tape very carefully to basically separate the two pieces. At this point, I'm also going to put the front panel aside, and I'm going to use the second one I created now as a guide to die cut the other 2 sheets of heavyweight white cardstock that I have at the side of my desk, so that I don't have to run the front panel through my die cutting machine too many times, because it may get marks from the scratches I have on my plates, and I just didn't want it to end up being too battered at the end of the process. So at this point I have die cut all my 3 extra layers for the shaker card out of some scrap cardstock, and I can layer them together using my Studio Katia liquid glue. I'm making sure that they are lined up as best as I can, but of course if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. Next, I took some acetate. I was trying to show it to you against the light here, and I adhered it at the back of the front panel of my shaker, so the one that was watercolor cardstock and not the scrap cardstock that I used for the other layers. And then once the acetate is secured in place, I can adhere that to the stacks of heavyweight white cardstock that I have there. This is going to create a slightly raised front for my shaker, so that I can use some not two-dimensional sequins and embellishments to fill it up. You can see here I was trying to show you how thick it is. It's not very thick at all, so this can be mailed pretty easily, and I don't think there would be even a problem with, you know, your shaker getting flat or anything like that. So as I said, I chose some flat embellishments, which included some glitter in different shades and some confetti from Studio Katia. I very generously sprinkled them on the base of my shaker. And then I can go ahead, coat the back of the shaker front with some liquid glue and adhere everything together. One thing that I have learned by making shaker cards is that you really want to make sure that everything is nicely secured on the edges before you go ahead and test your shaker, because I have sprinkled sequins, glitters and whatnot one too many times in my crafty life, so here's a little tip for you. At this point I could go ahead and adhere the flowers to the shaker front, and I think it's turning out really gorgeous with all that shimmer, that subtle sunset color palette in the background and these gorgeous flowers in the foreground. The last thing that I need, well, before moving on to the finishing touches anyway, is my sentiment. And for that I'm going to use the simple Trimmings dies and the Trimmings Saints 1 stamp set to create a banner. I used an orange ink to link the sentiment to the flowers that I have there on the front of my card, and then I adhered it to the card front using again Studio Katia liquid glue. I then decided to add a ton of these beautiful neon tangerine crystals. These were part of the latest release by Studio Katia using my embellishment wand. And then for even extra sparkle, I decided to coat the flowers with a glitter brush pen, and I used that only on the flowers, not on the leaves. Here I was tilting the card against the light in the hope that you would see some of the shimmer, but anyway, here is a close-up look at the final result. I think this is a colorful and happy card to brighten anyone's day. The interactive part of the shaker is really fun, and as I said, because it's so flat, it will be easy to mail as well. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create your own slimline shaker cards using Studio Katia stamps and dies. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more inspiration, and as always, thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.